a very, very brief history of the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. I've been told that people can't hear me in the back. Am I loud enough now? Or someone at the back want to let me know? Can you hear me? Yep. Up? Okay. Louder, I can do that. Okay. So one of the things they didn't mention in the video is something that happened after 1967. And that is, you can see it on the last map there. The part on where the clicker is right now is the West Bank, and all the white parts are either Israeli settlements, Jewish-only roads, or what are called security areas. So after Israel occupied the remaining territory, they began to build settlements, which were connected by roads that the Palestinians cannot use, and this continues to the day. The green part is the only land that's left for the Palestinians from the first map. That is the difference in the land ownership. You can go to the next slide. And this is also a picture of a wall that Israel started to build in 2000. And as you can see, there's a lighter green line on the outside, and that is called the Green Line. It's the agreed upon boundary from the 1967 war. But this wall snakes in over the boundary, swallowing up Palestinian villages and Israeli settlements, and creating a new de facto border in which there are 16% of the land of the West Bank is now trapped between the Green Line and the wall, where there are no hospitals. So, when a lot of, I'm very sorry the words on the slide don't show up, by the way, but I'll try to speak clearly so you can hear what I'm saying. When a lot of people ask me about, they say they don't know what to think when they're talking about Israel and Palestine, and they say there's two sides to the story, and I don't know who to believe. But there's definitely an obvious third option when you're trying to figure out the truth, and that is to look to the United Nations, to international law, and to human rights organizations. And all three of them are very, very clear on what they think about the conflict. So the UN has passed literally hundreds of resolutions affirming that all refugees have the right to return to their homes, that the occupation of Palestinian land is illegal, and they've called on Israel to withdraw from the land. Go to the next slide. There's also something else that relates to the conflict. It's called the Geneva Convention, and it's basically, the Geneva Convention is the rules of war and the protection of civilians in the time of war. And there's something called Article 49, and it defines the obligations that Israel has as an occupying power. One of the obligations they have is they cannot transfer civilian populations to the occupied territories. So that's where we get the idea that the settlements are illegal. It's enshrined in international law that colonizing occupied territory is illegal. They also have the duty to ensure food and medical supplies reach the population and not to destroy property. And this is another is a continuous and constant breach of international law committed by Israel, because they often will demolish Palestinian homes in the West Bank in order to make room for Israeli settlers. And human rights organizations are also very clear, like B'Tselem, that's an Israeli human rights group, and Human Rights Watch. And Amnesty International also records many violations of Palestinian human rights. They've accused Israel of committing war crimes in the assault on Gaza, of violating freedom of expression, the right to food, water, and health care, and of torturing Palestinian prisoners and unlawfully imprisoning them, between 8,000 to 10,000 Palestinians in Israeli jails. So, okay, there is my brief history and background information, so we'll finally get to talk about Gaza. So this, that is Gaza, the white strip right there between the Mediterranean. Egypt is down here, and that's Israel. It has a population of 1.5 million people, and almost half of the population are under 15 years old, so a very young population. The current unemployment rate there is 40%, which is higher than both Afghanistan and Sudan. So two regions experiencing high degrees of conflict right now. It's a very, very high unemployment rate. The 80% of the population lives below the poverty line, and over 70% of the population are refugees, so 1.1 million approximately out of the 1.5. These are pictures that I took in Gaza in 2009. On the right are pictures from Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza, and these are pictures from 1948 in Syria and Lebanon, and it shows you how sadly little has changed for the Palestinians since 1948. Many of them were born, grew up, and died in refugee camps. So out of the entire refugee population in the world, 2 out of every 5 refugees are Palestinian. That is the immensity of the problem. So, okay, this is my last little bit of history of what happened in Gaza right before the attacks last year. In 2005, the Israeli settlements were withdrawn, but Israel still controls the airspace, the sea coast, and the borders, so it's still considered occupied under international law, which means that Israel has all the corresponding duties that I spoke about earlier. In 2006, the Islamic resistance movement Hamas was democratically elected, and they later took over the governance of the Gaza Strip. Now, in response to this, Israel and Egypt began a siege of Gaza's borders, stopping most Palestinians from coming in and out, and doing the same thing with food and humanitarian aid. So, these are just some of the effects of the siege, which has been going on since 2007, so for 3 years. The Water Authority in Gaza had to dump 60 million liters of untreated sewage into the Mediterranean because they couldn't get enough fuel across the border to treat the sewage. 25 to 30% of the population doesn't receive running water because they don't have enough electricity for pumping. And many patients were denied health care. They were denied leaving the Gaza Strip to seek health care elsewhere. And also the cost of basic goods as a result of the siege skyrocketed.